Welcome to another episode of Life Matters. And today we will be talking about sermon matters or matters to the sermon. And let's talk about the theology of demons.
Woo! that's a grab right there.
That's right. Hey, thanks for tuning in with us. My name is Devon, and we have Pastor John here with us and one of our elders, Dale Griner. And we're going to talk about just a great topic of demons. We're glad you're here with us today. Hey, if you haven't already, we encourage you to share this video with people that you feel like will be encouraged by this. And we talked about this last time, but do not be distracted while driving. Please do not. If you're going to watch this at home with your family. You can put this into the car or your radio while you're driving, or to add it to your car while you're driving. Anyway, I wanted to talk about this. Let's get into the sermon. John, we talked about this, one of our hearts for the podcast being, and let's start to unpack the sermon a little more when the sermon is delivered, because there are a couple of questions or maybe a couple of insights that you don't have time to get into
right.
on a Sunday morning.
Right.
So just share with us first, brother, what you believe God was doing through the sermon, the main point of it.
So I've got my sermon notes here, and so yesterday we were in Luke 8, and in particular we're looking at the story of this man who was possessed by a legion of demons, and Jesus brings healing to him. He casts out the demons, and they go into these pigs jump off a cliff into the water. They all drown, and then the people of the town beg Jesus to leave. The guy who Jesus healed wants to go with Jesus, and instead Jesus sends him back as a missionary to his hometown. So there's so much there. And as I was examining this text and preaching through it and teaching through it, there's so many questions that come up. I had some really good conversations with people afterward, just on, what does demonic activity look like, and how does it apply to our lives, and how do we respond to it, and what is this concept of possession, and who can it happen to, and how can it happen, and so there's a lot to unpack in a sermon like this. My ultimate kind of takeaway from it is, and I said this in the sermon, this passage, this sermon is not about demons; it's about the power of Jesus, and so. Even as we talk today, and we kind of frame it in hey, we're gonna talk about demons today, and we are. And I think it's an important thing to talk about, because practically it's a little bit scary when we kind of just throw that out there, or the idea of possession, and I said in the sermon, a lot of people get their theology on demons from horror movies, or
mine was from the exorcism of Emily Rose.
Yeah, and you see stuff like that, and it's all right, okay, and so our mind of what it is to encounter demons is this terrifyingly scary thing, and kind of goes to this extreme level. And I think there's a lot in Scripture to help us to understand not just the concept of possession, but what is the goal of the demons and the enemy of God? What are they attempting to do? Kind of how do they position themselves to be able to do those things? And maybe most importantly, what can we do about it?
That's good. If you haven't seen yet, we brought our Bibles. Because we want to be people of the word, and as we're looking through the sermon, there was one question you kind of unpacked, and obviously you didn't have a lot of time to get into it. You kind of had to keep going, but kind of go into that, the difference. And I want to get Dale's point here too. Well, what do you see the difference of oppression in a person, or demonic activity, demonic oppression, versus are there levels to it? Or is there just a one size fits all?
Right.
Can a demon possess a Christian at all?
Okay. So I will take and if you don't mind, and run with that. Do I think, and I'll just answer that question, and just that question. Can a demon possess a Christian? Well, the Bible seems very clear that a house divided will fall. That's Jesus' words. And he says if you leave the house empty, if you sweep it out and leave it empty, then the demon will come back with more demons. But what I gather from there is if it's full, God's not living with the devil.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and we as believers, we are told we are indwelt and lived in, our bodies become temples to God. And so I don't believe that it makes any sense that if we are temples of God and God lives in us, that he's going to share that space with the devil.
Yeah, I absolutely affirm it. I think that Scripture is clear about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and the power of God over the enemy. They're not equals. They're not like two opposing. Like here's a good power and a bad power, and they're kind of clashing.
I gotta say, when you see like people post on Facebook where you have Jesus arm wrestling with the devil, that's not clear. That's not script. That's not biblical at all.
Right. Yeah. So like, it is a very one-sided thing. In fact, one of the things that we really talked about in here is like Jesus shows up, and the demon's only option is to like fall on the ground, quake before him, and beg him.
Yeah.
He gets no option, and so so this idea that a demon can possess a believer, I think, is according to Scripture not a reality. Right. Now, that being said, you kind of talked about these levels, and I do think there are levels to demonic activity. There are levels to most things in life. If I was in an argument with somebody, or a physical fight with somebody, or in a war with somebody, or in a war with a bunch of people, those are all levels. They're all conflict.
All conflict. Yeah.
But there's like a wide variety of what conflict looks like. So when we're just like demonic activity, it's much more broad than just like, okay, it's this one thing. Demons are seeking to influence things in the world all the time. I do believe when the Bible describes possession, it uses a couple different terms in it. It talks about somebody having a demon. There's this word kind of demonize, basically. But it seems to show some authority that the demon has taken on in a person's life. But one of the things I dove into in the sermon, and I think it's worth repeating here, is we don't get a lot of times in Scripture where we see the moment that happens for somebody, kind of like they go from like being in control to seemingly the demon has a lot more say in what they're doing. We see people who are already under that. But the few times that we do kind of see somebody stepping into that, it seems to be something they invited in. And I referenced Judas, and I think he's just maybe the most clear in my mind.
Saul is the who came to mind, and I thought you were going to go for because
Saul
of Old Testament, King Saul. Okay. Yeah, King Saul. As his story is, obviously he continues to take on the role that is supposed to be God's, or through Samuel, and he continues to push God out and push against the trust.
I debated honestly in bringing Saul into that description. My tension with Saul was, I'm not as comfortable saying Saul was definitively not a follower of God,
right?
Where he was anointed by God at the very least. He was used by God. It seems that there was a lot of activity of God in his life, and he rejected it. So I view Saul almost more as somebody who was being heavily influenced, being tormented, but not necessarily under control. And we talk about those levels. So I had a little bit of a tension with him of, I don't know that I would put him into the same realm.
Possession.
Right.
Maybe
Using
he's
that term.
Tormented for sure.
Right.
Possessed, maybe. There were moments in which it seems he could have been.
Right.
But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't think he was
distinction.
indwelled by. It's almost like he's surrounded by. And I know that's kind of like splitting a little bit of hairs, but I do think there is a distinction in his life. He has allowed the enemy, and also we have to go with, he is before Christ. Right. So he is before a fuller understanding of being indwelled by the Spirit of
Right,
God
right.
because of the sacrifice of Jesus. And that's probably a topic for another day of exactly the distinction between Old Testament, New Testament, how people functioned. But with Judas was, I mean, he walked with Jesus, he talked with Jesus, he saw miracles, and he clearly rejected it. But what stood out to me is there's this moment in the Last Supper where Judas is, he's sitting around, and it says that the devil entered his heart. And Jesus says, hey, go and do what you're going to do. And he leaves, and he goes, and that night betrays Jesus. But for me, like, as I considered his story, Judas had already made plans to betray Jesus. And yet it doesn't say until that moment that the devil entered his heart. And so there seems to be this courting, this flirting with the enemy, this welcoming of like, hey, come on in a little bit more, until that moment where it was like, okay, you've given, you not the devil or demons came in and took control, but you invited them in, and you gave them
little
control.
by little,
Right, that little bit.
And one of the things you didn't mention on that story that I think is interesting is, to your point, even it doesn't get mentioned until afterwards, and they say that they like realized, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but they realized he had been stealing.
Yeah.
And so there had been these other things throughout the middle of, and they noticed these things afterwards.
Right.
But it was a little by little. Yeah.
You're referring to Judas.
Judas.
John 13, by the way. John chapter 13 talks about this.
There you go.
Good caveat.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's good. And I think that's a good point that Judas was, John just says like, hey, he was stealing all along, and it seems to be something they found out later.
Right.
And so there was already like all this influence of the enemy happening in Judas's heart over and over. And so when I look at a guy like this, where it says like he's got a legion of devils, of demons in him, there seems to be likely that little by little he gave over control. The region that he lived in would have been a place where there was a lot of cultic idol worship, and so I think we can make some fair assumptions about like the things that he would have been exposed to.
So contextualize that, kind of like if we hear about New Orleans where there's relative witchcraft going on, or we hear about voodoo and those things like that.
I think some of those where we can blatantly say, okay, there's like an embracing of a sense of evil activity, and I know some people try to parse that out and be like, well, there's kind of good things to it too, but there's like this embracing of a spiritual realm of kind of giving ourselves over in a cultic manner to spiritual forces that don't always want good for us. They kind of like pay them off and they'll do us favors, kind of thing. And so, he embraced that and seemingly in his life to a point that it just like took over control, that by the time we find him, he is, I said this in the sermon, he's naked. He's, according to Mark, he's been like scratching and cutting himself with stones. He's out of his mind. They chain him up. He keeps breaking the chains as the demons just like have more power and authority over his life. And it's a brokenhearted situation until Jesus. And Jesus shows up and everything changes for the man. And I would point to that I think there's something still inside of him, some control, some level of control that he still has. That he wanted what Jesus was offering. I think he saw the depths of what the enemy offered, and he was controlled by that, and something is still inside of him began to see and realize and long for the freedom that Jesus was ready to give. So
that's good.
Since you're on there, I do want to say that one of the things I think is important for why we recognize, or why we should recognize, that there is like this giving up. It's not as popular now. When we were, in the first video, we talked about, all these other videos are out there for people to watch. And I remember watching a few years back, every video that came across my Facebook were these people that would go to church every Sunday and they would get exercised every Sunday. And it became this big thing. And I think what it can do is become a problem for like of recognizing like we as people aren't overly great to begin with. But me just to blame all of my problems on demons, that doesn't make it better. Matter of fact, if I'm allowing that, then that is like this.
Okay. Yeah,
that's good.
I think that's a really good point, because it's a conversation I had after the sermon that I was talking with somebody. And I said people sometimes almost want to use demons as like a scapegoat, like
the devil made me do it.
Right. I got this spirit that's attacking me, and like if you do, you're letting that in. Like there's something we talked about in the sermon. Like, hey, what are you watching? What are you spending your time on? Like, what are you entertained by? What are you allowing into the lives of your kids, your family, and like I think we often as a society and as Christians do a very bad job at like guarding the barriers of our homes, of our lives, of our minds, of our hearts. And so if that's happening, then it's us. But two, it's like people often want to turn it into like something I had to do rather than something I'm willingly participating in. And so the influence of the enemy, if we have Jesus, if we have his power in our lives, if the Spirit indwells our hearts, then submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you.
James 4.
Nice.
And so like we're given like a very clear, and that doesn't mean like it's always easy, because go back to James 1, it's like, all right, hard things happen, trials happen, difficulty happens, and consider it joy when it does, because then we're going to develop faith.
Yeah.
But there's also this sense of like, I don't have to submit to the enemy.
Right.
In the way that I don't, because I'm not stronger than him. Like clearly this guy wasn't stronger than the demons. It was Jesus was, and Jesus could command them. And so, as we kind of consider, I got this question after the sermon. They were like, somebody asked me, like, what level of things should we look at and say, okay, that's demonic?
That's a good question. Good question.
And I said, like, just because demonic activity often has these things around them. So like this guy was self-harming and kind of
the guy in the story.
Right.
Jesus,
In Luke 8.
Yep.
He had a lot of these things going on. We kind of look at some of the symptoms. And what we can do if we're not careful is we say, okay, anybody who exhibits those symptoms is possessed by a demon. And so, somebody asked me, they said, okay, what about like anxiety, like or clinical depression, or these things? Somebody dealing with seizures, is that demonic?
Mental and physical ailments.
Right. Yeah. And as we have to separate out, like there's just mental illness and physical illness that isn't the direct attack of an enemy. It's not demonic possession. It's the fact that we live in a broken world, and so the result of just being in brokenness means that like even our bodies are broken. And so sometimes the chemicals in the brain don't work right, and so we can't simply say, okay, like that means you have a demon.
Right.
Like there are times where it's like, okay, hey, you have a medical condition, and let's treat a medical condition. Yeah. And also let's treat it with the things of God as well, but not ignore the beauties of medicines or treatments
that God has provided.
Right. God's given us the mind, the ability to understand these things and to care for these things. And so, I think that people, if we hyper spiritualize or over spiritualize the role of demons, then it will put people who are hurting from practical issues that could benefit from medications or things like counseling and therapy,
Right,
and stuff,
right.
which I'm a huge advocate of.
Right.
Like I think just sitting and talking about things, our world often kind of wants to numb pain, and we almost
glorify it.
yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think like for the average person, what we almost find is like, I don't want to hurt ever. And so we watch, you kind of see people out there who seem to just have it all together. And we're like, okay, that's what I'm supposed to attain. And so then when I'm going through life and I'm pursuing God, and yet I still experience pain and difficulty, I must be doing something wrong. And so we almost kind of get to this spot where people so want to numb pain. They want to not feel pain, and people can do that through all kinds of things, through prescribed medicines, through abusing prescribed medicines, through alcohol or illicit drugs, but also through things like just numbing out, just staring at a screen for hours upon hours, trying to get that endorphin hit over and over again.
You've called it doom scrolling now.
Doom scrolling?
Yeah, that's
all
right.
You keep us young and relevant.
That's
there.
right.
I'll take your word for it. But yeah, so like I think we kind of, as a society, try to numb pain, and the reality is pain is there for a reason. And so, if I shared this analogy with somebody yesterday, if ants are on my hand and they start biting me, my body's reaction and response is pain. And I need that, because otherwise I'm just going to sit there in an anthill and get eaten alive by ants. I need the pain to make me realize, okay, there's something that you need to change, something that needs to shift. And so, what can I do about it? And so if I just sit there continuing in pain, then I get, or sit there, not feeling pain, then I'm just going to get eaten up. So I think the same thing. Like sometimes we feel sadness, and it's like, okay, what is that sad? Not just dwell in it.
Right.
Let me look at my emotions. Let me look at my feelings. See them, confront, not be afraid of them, because I think that's what we do. We get afraid of them. Let me confront them, and then say, okay, what do I need to learn? What is it there for? Is there something for me to shift? And so sometimes I'm going to look at that. I'm going to say, okay, man, I have, and I'm just talking a normal sense of anxiety about, I step into my day, I just feel anxious. I think my first question is, why? Why is it there? Is it there for a purpose? Is it there for a reason? Maybe it's like, I've got a lot to do.
Right.
And so maybe that needs to tell me, like, hey, I need to create a to-do list. I need to kind of schedule out my time, or maybe there's some stuff I need to cut out of my schedule. I'm overwhelmed. Okay, let me evaluate why I'm overwhelmed and what I can do to shift it. Or I kind of get there and I say, okay, I've evaluated all the things, and I don't find anything that is off. I know now I can talk to friends, brothers, sisters, and say, okay, like, hey, do y'all see something? Because I'm continuing to have this feeling. I'm not sure where it's coming from. But if I find that there's just nothing there, then I can say, okay, like, I see you, anxiety. I recognize you there, but like, I don't. There's nothing there.
Right.
And so I can have freedom from that. And I know that's almost an oversimplified. I'm not suggesting that there aren't times of like clinical, medical, chemical things that are going on.
Yeah.
But when we just turn it into like, I'm anxious, a demon's attacking me.
Right.
Like, then we have so missed the point of some of these pain triggers that I think are God-given, that He allowed us to be able to have. And so,
yeah, that's good.
Pretty good there. We'll say something happened in the sermon where you got to the point of the message where the demon said, "What is your name?" Or they say, or Jesus asked, "What is your name?"
right.
And then they beg him not to banish them to the abyss.
Mm-hmm.
What is the abyss?
So the word abyss there, kind of this picture of an unending hole, just this emptiness. it's a word that could be used. Like sailors actually found it interesting that the right before this story, Jesus went really out of his way to go reach this man. I talked about it in the sermon. It shows the depth of the love that he had for us, that he had for this man. But I think we could apply that to us, the depth of love that he had for us to come and get us. But as they were traveling across the Sea of Galilee, it's that famous story of the storm coming up and Jesus calming the storm. But like what they were afraid of is going into the abyss, drowning in this sea. And so sailors would have been afraid of the abyss. But the fact that the demon uses it and he's gonna in a spiritual realm seems to indicate something deeper. In fact, when we have the story recorded 3 different times, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record the story, and so sometimes as I'm preparing the sermon, I'm not just giving the information that Luke gave us. I'm going to say, okay, let me look to see what else there is there. In Matthew, he says, don't send us into the abyss before the appointed time. And so it kind of helps us understand a little bit more of what the abyss is, because we know that the demons, the devil, were cast out of heaven, and they have some authority. And God allows them for God's ultimate wisdom allows them to still impact things in the world. And yet we know that their eventual placement is in hell. And hell's a real place. And I think what stood out to me is they're terrified of it. And so I think, like, we talked about like horror movies or like pop culture giving theology. Hell is not a place where the devil and the demons are like, woohoo, we're in charge, right?
It's a rave,
right? Like, and I think because I've heard people. I had somebody tell me that they like when they were younger, they were like they were far from Christ, and they were like, yeah, I thought like go to hell and have fun,
right?
And like the demons who like in those kind of pictures, you almost view them like, oh, they're the guys kind of running the evil party. They're terrified. They're like, please don't send us there, because it is a place of pure destruction.
Right.
And so, that really stood out to me as the terror that they had. But also they recognized Jesus had the full authority to go ahead and do it. He didn't have to wait. He could have just been like, nope, doing it right now. Go into the abyss. And instead he chooses to allow them to go into this herd of pigs. Whole bunch of question marks that we had in that, kind of dove through some of that in the sermon, but he allows them to kind of do something a little bit different, but it's all based in Jesus's authority. They had to do whatever he said. They had to do it.
You mentioned the pigs. Let's jump into it. Dale, you listened to it. You was there.
Yeah.
So give some insight. What was your take on what you heard about the pigs and the significance of why would Jesus send them there? Why not spare the pigs?
So I did actually think it was interesting. And actually, we ended up talking about it a little bit afterwards. To which I thought that the best part is the point that you made of the value, because we could speculate back into about why the pigs, why they didn't matter, But at the end of the day, what we know is in those days they were all farmers. And so regardless of, whether they were Jewish and they shouldn't have had them, or whether they were, pagans, that didn't matter if they had pigs or not, pigs were value. And we found this mark, right, that you said it says 2,000 pigs. Like, it's not just like a large herd of like 20 pigs.
Right.
It's 2,000 pigs. This is a lot of value.
A lot of bacon.
A lot of bacon. So I did think, I thought that was very interesting that you brought that point out, because it's easy to kind of read through there and just be like, why the pigs? Especially considering that they didn't just run off and die,
In an abyss.
In an abyss.
So. Yeah. No, I think that the pigs do. They show the immense value that Jesus placed upon the life of this man. again, I think what we see happening in his life, we can apply to our. We don't have to be possessed by a demon to know that what Jesus did for us was even greater, because it didn't just cost 2,000 pigs. It cost the perfect Son of God, who we read all this and we're like, oh, we can learn so much, we can understand so much, but like it cost his life and him defeating death on our behalf. And so we see the great value of the sacrifice. And I think it points to like, man, like you get almost uncomfortable with this sacrifice that was made for this guy to be able to have freedom. And instead, like when we understand like the greater, significantly, like infinitely greater sacrifice that happened on our behalf, then this story almost the sacrifice of 2,000 pigs almost seems like, oh, okay.
It's incredibly interesting, because honestly, even in all of that, my mind never really even went there. But I think that is, I think that's easy to miss. Like, do we read the crucifixion, the story of the crucifixion? Do we read that with the same, like, man, the value of his life given up, like in the way that he was, for us? Like, do we read that the same way that we read, like, man, these farmers lost 2,000 pigs?
Now, the verse prior to that, all the people, the townspeople are upset. They're like, well, what about our bacon? Where's our pigs?
Yeah.
And so you got all this chaos. These people saying, get out of our town. He's like, let me come with you. And Jesus says, no, you need to go back home.
Yeah.
And just talk about we talk about the power of Jesus. Just the confidence that Jesus is still in this man to trust in his word to go back home. Just talk about that a little bit. What we think about our stories, and we'll tell them to go. It's very easy to just sit there and say, well, Jesus, I want to be where you're going, but you tell me to go and follow you. What's the tension there? Why? Back home is where the cults are. Is where the people are like, man, this man, he was possessed. Why is he back here now? Tell us about Jesus.
But see, that's what I think is so beautiful about it is he has this story now of freedom and redemption from the enemy, and we look at our lives, like part of our story is how has God provided freedom from the enemy. We see his attacks, and I find it really interesting that he is sent back home. As I consider like Jesus sending him back home, I think one of the things that jumps out at me is oftentimes Jesus uses people in places that are familiar to them. Okay. Even in the context of like, we think of somebody like Paul, like, okay, Paul went to all these places in the world and certainly to places that were unfamiliar, but in a way, Paul was uniquely gifted for that audience. Paul says about himself that he had this ability to like know languages, and we know, like we record, like Paul had this ability to know all these different languages, and so he could communicate with people across a broad range. For a guy like this, he is sent back into a place that has such a heavy demonic influence, but it's something he knows, and he also knows the path to get out of it. And so in a place where it would have been surrounded by these ideas of, okay, like you surrender over to these idols, you give yourself over to these idols and stuff, and he knows like where that ultimately leads. And instead, now he gets to go back to a story that can relate to people. Right. And I think that's one of the really cool things is like we all have different stories, but they can relate to people. And so like my story, this is one of the things that we've talked about often. My story is different from your story or your story. Like my story is coming from a primarily Christian home and I kind of like, I know I was going to become a pastor at a fairly young age, at like 14. And I did plenty of stupid things. I made plenty of bad decisions. But there are some people's stories that maybe they aren't going to relate to my story in the same way. Right. They're going to say, okay, like, hey, but like, how do you deal with this? And I can tell people things from from a biblical response, like here's what Scripture tells us, but maybe my story isn't the same as like your story, right. Where there's plenty of times where somebody will come into the church and we're like, man, they've got a story that they're going to connect with you.
A little bit more like my story.
Right.
And so it's easier for me to speak into them because coming out of there, it's not like, oh, well, you don't understand because you've never been here.
Right.
And so for them, it would have been very much the same as, we talked about, like maybe it was Jewish, maybe it wasn't Jewish. If it wasn't Jewish, a Jewish man going in there and trying to like speak into their lives is going to be way different, especially in their cultural context.
Right.
Than him who is, he was raised with them and has been separated from them, and so they can see that difference so big.
Yeah. And so I think that's the neat thing about our stories is, I think there's people with like stories that had these lower lows or higher highs, and then there's people who kind of have stories that are kind of the fairly consistent across.
Yep.
And I think people on both sides of those stories might like look at the other story and be like, oh, I wish I had that story.
Right.
I wish I had that story. I've heard people who like God was just gracious to them across their entire lives, and they'll be like, oh man, I wish I had a story. I'm like, no, you don't.
No. I heard it.
Right. And so I feel like, and also like, I think when your story does have like those extremes, it's not like, oh man, I wish I didn't have this story. It's like, man, God uses this story. Like this guy, it's his story. That at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. That's his story.
Yep.
And Jesus knows how to use his story.
Right.
And so
my story for and if he'd run across on the boat, nobody else would have known the story except for the people that were on the boat.
That's a good point.
And he could have told him the story, but who's going to believe that?
Right. Well, it wouldn't have the same impact.
Right.
Like going to the people who are like, yeah, we saw you when you lived out in the tombs and ran around like a madman, and like now
you cut up with chains.
Yeah. Well, I even think about like people at Life Church who getting to see their stories, getting to see like where God brought them from and where God has brought them to. There's something impactful about seeing that story, as opposed to somebody who, from outside of like somebody I just meet randomly and they'll tell me their story. It's like, oh man, that's really I don't get me wrong, I love hearing it. I'm excited, and I want to hear anybody's story, but there is something particularly beautiful about
watching.
I've walked through this story with you, like there's the evidence. Like I know who that person was. I know who that person is. And so I think this guy, as he's getting sent back in, even though he's a little disappointed, and you got this town that's like, hey, we want nothing to do with you. He has a unique position to be able to do it. And the irony is, I'm actually just now kind of clicking with this. I'm going to put out another theory. I put out theories on why the pigs died. So maybe it was Jewish context and they weren't supposed to have them. Maybe there was a disease in the pigs and Jesus was protecting them from it. Maybe I like the theory. Maybe it was when pigs fly and somebody got saved. But consider this: if it was just the guy got saved and like had the demons cast out, how much attention was anybody in the town going to give it? Right? Like, this is such a disruptor that brings everybody out from, because one is like, don't get me wrong, I think this story would have been pretty incredible. Like, hey, you remember that guy who's out there, and he's been like raving like a madman, like, and he's normal now. And I think there might have been people who were like, sure he is. You just caught him at a good moment. He has good moments.
Yeah.
This mass destruction of all these pigs makes the entire community come out. And so, as I said, this is just kind of clicking with me. I haven't given a lot of thought through this, but maybe that's part of like getting the whole community out there is like this big event that like nobody can deny what just happened.
No, I love that, because here's the thing, in consideration of that and going back and actually taking it in that direction, you get this this guy who is getting changed. And by the time they get back, he's changed. And they recognize that he's changed. He's not the same guy. But what they also see, 2,000 pigs in the water, floating dead.
Yeah.
And it says that they were terrified, and they asked Jesus to leave because they were scared. And so, like, it is this major event. It's
and I think it also points to there were demons involved.
right.
Like, this isn't just he was a guy who had a rough patch.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, this is like, man, demons are real, and yet the power of this Jesus guy is something.
Yeah.
I mean, we should have had this conversation before I did the sermon. I would have been dive into this a little. But no, I think there really is something to that, of like the attention that it would have drawn in, and the value of what it adds to his story. And so the devil's referred to as a deceiver. He's very crafty and things like that.
Yep.
But he's not smarter. He's not more crafty than God. Right? Like he's not more intelligent. He's not going to outthink Jesus. Jesus gives them permission to do this. And so, for whatever reason, you know, maybe they're like, the demons are like, yeah, we're going to take one last shot at this community. We're going to do this. Now I'm looking at him like, man, Jesus used it for good. Well, our reaction is it's bad. The whole place wants to kick Jesus out. But, like, Jesus knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
We see that with the cross too, right? Because the devil thinks that he's winning in this whole scenario, and yet Jesus he's like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
That's good.
And so just understanding as we talk about demons today, we get this particular fear, and I'm not saying we should take them lightly. They are stronger than us. They are more intelligent than us. Seemingly, that seems to be the description that the Scripture gives us. They're more intelligent than us. They're stronger than us, but they're not more intelligent or stronger than God.
That's right.
And that level is not even close.
Mm-hmm.
And so like where I started off with the sermon, and kind of start off here. This is a story about the authority of God, and so we look at demons and we understand their position, their limited nature. I do think we are foolish to think there's not spiritual things going around. You know, our fight's not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces and principalities.
Season 6.
And so taking that and saying, okay, then we want to recognize that there is this battle. We want to put on the spiritual armor. We want to be prepared for it. We don't want to assume that everything is always a demon trying to trick me. Like sometimes, like, you know, man, I'm feeling depressed. I'm like, well, I've been scrolling on my phone for 4 hours. Yeah, and I'm gonna feel depressed. Or you know, I haven't exercised in 3 months. Like maybe I'd feel better if I just took care of my foot. You know, we are physical and spiritual and emotional beings, and so I need to take care of all those things.
Even like, oh, I want to do this thing I know is wrong.
Right.
That's not a demon. That's you.
Right. Right. Yeah.
By your own desires.
Yeah. Exactly. Taken by my own desires and then I feel bad about it, and we're like, oh, must be a demon, or you did things that God said don't do this, and it's not what's right for you, and you get the result.
And then He convicts you.
Yeah.
And you recognize, oh, I should not have done that.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's a good encouragement for us as we wrap up our episode. It's just, church, your story matters.
That's right.
And that God actually has you in the place that you're in right now, in the season that you're in, for a reason. And your story can be used for His glory. But that doesn't mean listening to His word. And what Jesus says, go.
That's right.
We go. Therefore, Life Church, go to your mission field, and we will see you guys next time. Take care.